they come out with a flimsy excuse by saying it's the fabric of the union, the law. We know. We've been outside the law for 12 months. The law says we must cross the picket line.
I want to welcome you all here tonight. My name is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm one of the members of the LaborFest Organizing Committee. The LaborFest Festival, which was established in 1994 to commemorate the San Francisco General Strike and the West Coast Maritime Strike. And it's a month-long series of events, movies, theater, book presentations, and other panels on the history of workers, not only in San Francisco, but workers internationally, their struggle, their role. And since we focus particularly on the general strike and the ILWU and its history, we're happy to have the event tonight, which is about the history of international solidarity of the ILWU. The ILWU has been, I would say, the most important union in the United States in carrying out direct solidarity actions with workers around the world, and in support of struggles and workers around the world, particularly starting in the 40s when it stopped the transfer of iron to Japan. So our guests this evening, our speakers are Jack Heyman. Jack has been active in numerous campaigns for international labor solidarity. In 1984, as a member of the Inland Boatmen's Union, he was one of the organizers of the anti-apartheid action against the Nedeloid Kimberley in San Francisco and was fired for that. In 1996, he was sent to Liverpool, England, by Brian McWilliams, who is here tonight, to bring the ILWU solidarity greetings to the dockers fighting against a union-busting attack. This led to the Neptune Jade boycott and the fight that beat back the attempt by the maritime bosses to victimize the organizers. In 2000, Jack initiated the ILWU Local 10 campaign for solidarity with the Charleston, South Carolina Longshore Union, fighting against the attempt to use scab labor to work the Nadana Shangberg, sparking dock workers in Spain to the defense of the Charleston Five. In 2003, during a Port of Oakland protest against the Iraq War's business agent on the scene, police beat and arrested him. Then on May Day 2008, acting on a motion Heyman had introduced in Local 10, all West Coast ports were shut down to protest the U.S. imperialist war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And from 2002 on into 2010, 2014, 21, 2023, and 24, as Palestinians have risen up against Zionist terror, Jack has been deeply involved in Local 10's solidarity actions, and Jack is a supporter of the Internationals Group. Also joining us is Brian McWilliams, who is past president of the ILWU. He started sailing in 1967. He joined ILWU and he became president, and most notably, as far as supporting international actions, was his fight at the WTO. He spoke about at the WTO in 1999 when the ILWU and other unions took action against the WTO. So I want to welcome the speakers to this meeting.
And first of all, I mean, this is a discussion of the history of the ILWU's labor solidarity actions. And I want to thank LaborFest for working so hard to strengthen labor culture and every aspect of what you do in the month-long events. But solidarity starts at home. It doesn't necessarily have to be worldwide. It has to start somewhere. It starts at home. And educating ourselves and each other is a necessary foundation of people's perceptions of solidarity. And I might have said before that solidarity really starts at home. And it's how we take care of each other in the communities we're in that really gives us a basis for what we do internationally. Educating ourselves is the most important part of creating a basis for solidarity actions and for meaningful labor activism. And it can be really difficult it's a hard job getting out the membership and educating them on particular issues, but it's also the job of the membership to educate the union's leadership. So it's in a rank and file democratic union, it really can work really well. There's a synergy to it that is necessary for meaningful things to happen. And the ILWU is full of a great history of meaningful actions. And there are lots of other unions that have done the same thing and tried really hard. But we're here today to talk about the ILWU and the impact that the unions had on workers all over the world. I'm just going to touch on some. There's a long list, of course, of examples. But when it comes to international solidarity, even before the ILWU was a union, dock workers were doing spontaneous and organized demonstrations against arms shipments to Asia and to Siberia and other places where the government or the employers were trying to pull the wool over our eyes, sending things overseas labeled as cargo that it really wasn't, but they're really guns and munitions to suppress workers in their activities. But the ILWU, the same people, has a great history of doing things that were really connected to the community. In 1938, when we refused to load scrap iron for Japan because it was being used against Chinese people, and ultimately it was going to be used in the war effort. That was a really meaningful and great event that workers would take it upon themselves to say, you know, this is wrong. We're not doing this. We don't care what consequences are. No support for this war effort. And then it goes on and on. That actually generated a boycott of Japanese goods in this country at that time. During the 1980s, during the El Salvador coffee boycott, that was a very meaningful experience for us. It was very successful. We were able to stop. Admittedly, some came in through the Gulf. We were able to stop coffee coming from El Salvador to the West Coast. In some cases, the ship had to take all the coffee back to El Salvador with them. And this was in support of the oppression of what was going on in El Salvador against the government suppression. And the Sandinistas and the Contras in Nicaragua, we played a role in pressuring that situation. And the Pinochet war effort, where we kept military goods off of ships for 2 years because it was going to go to support the Chilean military government at that time. It just goes on and on. Kim Dae-jung was a Korean activist who was kidnapped in Japan and taken back to Korea and sentenced to death by the then Korean government. And I bring that up now because the El Salvador coffee boycott was so successful that when the ILWU, the leadership at that time, sent a letter to the Blue House, which is the Korean White House, saying that indeed, if Kim Dae-jung is not set free, and furthermore, if he is executed, there will be a boycott of all Korean cargo on the whole Pacific Rim. And we've been so successful with the El Salvador coffee boycott that it really packed a punch and had some impact on what happened afterwards. He was not executed. He was set free. He ultimately ran for president and won the election and invited the officers of the ILWU to his inauguration. I was one of those officers, and was a very proud moment for our union and all that we've done and all that we stand for. Maritime Union of Australia, their Rio Tinto beef, and how we interacted with our Rio Tinto employers in Boron. You know, dock workers are fortunate in a way that our boundaries don't, our world, we don't have them. Our employers are multinational employers, and we have access to them through all of our affiliates all over the world, people that we have relationships with, people that we're going to be talking about solidarity with. And, that was WTO in Seattle was another example of that, where we were able to come together with many, many, many other unions that all had the same issues with the same employee structures. So, but let me move. Speaking of proud moments, at the Oakland Coliseum, at a sold-out event, when Nelson Mandela spoke to the crowd, I'll paraphrase part of what he said, related to our boycott of the Ned Lloyd Kimberley at Pier 80 with South African cargo, when there had been many actions, but nothing as impactful and as meaningful or ultimately successful as this. He said he thanked the ILWU, I'm paraphrasing some of what he said, thanked the ILWU for striking the spark that lit the fire that allowed Americans to act upon their conscience. That's a pretty spectacular accomplishment for a tiny little union out on the left coast. So, and that's a product of rank and file activism. That's a product of rank and filers going out and educating the membership. That's a product of years of staying focused on trying to overturn the oppression and mistreatment of workers halfway around the world. And these people, these rank and filers, really are responsible for having this spark that lit that fire. And it's really important that unions play that role. It's way, like Harry Bridges said once about these issues are way too important for the politician. It's the rank and filers that need to weigh in and decide what our direction is and how to do the right thing for people. And so that's just another example. There's so many examples in the ILWU, and it's a proud history for all of us. And another time in 1990, I was in the West Bank and Gaza during the first Intifada, and witnessed firsthand how badly people were treated. And I thought I would dedicate a lot more of my time to that cause, but life kind of caught up with me, and I'm sorry that I didn't really spend more time working against the occupation. But anyway, here we are today, after 50 years of people being treated in a way that is unconscionable. Any place else in the world, people were treated like that, everybody would have responded. And it's interesting to me that all of a sudden, and in 1990, there was no Hamas, that all of a sudden, I don't know what people thought was going to happen. All of a sudden, it just boiled over. Couldn't be tolerated anymore. And what's happened since then is probably the greatest tragedy in my life, in our life, in terms of what's happened to our humanity. Terrible, terrible. Terrible thing to witness. And what are we doing? We're going to work every day, pay taxes to support it, to make it happen. So, you know, we need to educate our members. It's rank and solidarity is what unions are all about. It's how we take care of each other. It's what we do on the job. And it's the way the only way we're gonna successfully create a future that where we continue being a part of it and serve workers and continue to prosper and do that with good conscience. So anyway, that's my kind of opening. I don't know if I can pass the baton to someone else now. I'd be happy to do that. But thank you all for being here, and I'm very eager to hear what your thoughts are and what I can learn from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for your work over many, many decades, actually.
As you said, I'm a retired member of ILWU Local 10. Our local is known up and down the coast and in some places internationally as the Black and Red local. Black for our racial composition and red for our politics. And some even consider that Local 10 is the most militant union around when it comes to actions. Our union actions are based on our ideology expressed in the Constitution of Local 10. For instance, we ban cops from membership in the union. They're the Praetorian Guard of the capitalist class. They murdered 2 strikers here in San Francisco and 4 others up and down the coast in 1934. And we shut down all the ports in commemoration of those martyrs. So that's a fundamental critical point, that we ban cops. In fact, I don't know any other union that does. Maybe in the discussion period, other people can chime in on that. Now, the preamble of the Local 10 Constitution, my favorite part reads, we also recognize by experience that organization of the working class and unity of action is imperative and essential to combat the encroachments of organized and consolidated capital on the fundamental rights of labor. You know, that could have easily been written by Karl Marx. And the point about cops comes directly out of Lenin's State and Revolution. And, you know, we shouldn't be stultified in trying to talk about revolutionaries. And that, I think that's one of the remnants of the Red Scare. And we have to give credit where credit is due. One of the key documents of the ILWU is the 10 Guiding Principles. And in that, it says you should never cross a picket line. Even if your union official orders you to cross a picket line, never cross a picket line. And we're going to go through different solidarity actions that we were involved in over the years. And almost every one of them dealt with the picket line question. You can't cross a picket line. You cannot work behind a picket line. That's what our 10 Guiding Principles say. So for the last of some 20 years, ILWU international officers have been jettisoning these fundamental principles forged by our founders in the Albion Hall group. There was a group of leftist longshoremen, thus undermining our structure and left political moorings. Many think that ILWU means International Longshore Workers Union. In fact, it means International Longshore and Warehouse Union. And the reason I think a lot of people miss that is because for at least a couple decades now, the main focus of ILWU has been solely confined to the Longshore Division, not warehouse, not any of our other divisions. And that's another indication of where we're falling off the tracks of our history of class struggle and the principles that go along with that. So the founders of the ILWU built an industrial union encompassing all workers in the logistics chain, not just longshoremen, but warehouse especially. You know, at one point in the Bay Area here, there were more Local 6 warehousemen than there were Local 10 longshoremen. And it's just an indication of how the union's orientation has shifted. And I'm going to get into organizing warehouses a little later, but I want to stick to this idea of craft unions, business unionism, which represents the highest paid and most skilled workers. Craft unionism is business unionism. It's class collaboration with the bosses. Former President Bob McElrath went to Harvard Business School. This one you'll love. Went to Harvard Business School with the head of the Employers Association, Jim McKenna, and they both gave mutual admiration presentation of the so-called benefits of working together, completely denying the basic conflict between labor and capital. When McElrath was a vice president in charge of organizing, little attention was paid to organizing in warehouse. Back in the day, old timers used the leverage from longshore to help bolster organizing in warehouses. And as I said before, at one point, there were more members in the warehouse local here because of that. McElrath was only concerned with PMA registration for longshore workers. Now, Willie Adam, who's the present president and who's retiring, took class collaboration one step higher. He bragged about being invited to the Biden White House during contract negotiation and voluntarily promised a no-strike pledge during negotiations. I mean, he's doing the work of the employers. That's Taft-Hartley. Cooling off period, no strike pledge. Terrible. Because the union's only real leverage in contract negotiations is the threat of a strike. And he just threw that out the porthole. So that was a craven first for an ILWU president. It's never happened before, as far as I know. And Willie likes to brag about it in the Dispatcher, the ILWU paper. But there's an even more dangerous trend I see happening in labor relations. And that is that unions are growing together closer and closer to the state. And the ILWU has a perfect example of that. We used to lobby in Washington, like a lot of unions do, to get favorable legislation. But we've taken it one step further. And now our lobbyist, Max Vekich, is not a lobbyist. He's the head of the Federal Maritime Commission. As far as I know, the government, a capitalist government, is not the friend of the working class. They're our opponents. So that's a very dangerous trend, and we need to keep our eye on that because it's not just happening with the ILWU. Teamsters president, what's his name, Sean O'Brien, is getting buddy-buddy with Trump, like he wants to maybe have some position in the government. I don't know. But this is a dangerous trend for the working class. The most glaring example of ILW's shift to the right on international issues is in 1950, in the midst of the anti-Red Scare, ILWU boldly stood firm in its opposition to the US-NATO war against Korea, which was backed by China. Today, ILWU tops have followed the lead of the reactionary, social patriotic ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association on the East Coast, supporting both the US-NATO wars in Ukraine and Palestine. So that I think more than anything else right now shows how far to the right the leadership of the ILWU has gone. And just one other aside here, so many times ILWU as a whole takes credit for what Local 10 did. For instance, we'll be showing some clips of the ILWU's Local 10's action against apartheid. And we'll see how that transpired. So in 1934, there were three major strikes that rocked Wall Street capitalists. There was the San Francisco and the entire West Coast strike by longshoremen and seamen. And all the ports were shut down. It was a major battle between labor and maritime capitalists. And labor lost some of its soldiers, its militants in the battle, but in the end prevailed by winning hiring hall, a 6-hour shift in the midst of a depression, a union, coastwide union, one union, not the way the ILA did it on the, or does it in the East Coast, one master contract for the whole coast for longshore. That other strike that was a powerful show of labor militancy was the Minneapolis Teamsters. And they didn't call a general strike in Minneapolis because they didn't want the Labor Council, composed of conservative union bureaucrats, to end their strike, to control their strike and picket lines. That's what happened in San Francisco. The San Francisco Labor Council tried to end the strike by longshoremen and seamen. Everyone went back to work after the general strike, but they did not prevail and stop. They didn't stop the longshoremen from staying out. They stayed out till they got what they won. And the third strike at that period was Toledo auto workers. And that was the, all three of these strikes had similar conditions, similar experiences. For instance, all three of them were led and or influenced by left parties. For instance, here on the West Coast, it was the Communist Party that played an important role in winning that strike. In Minneapolis, it was the Communist League of America, headed by James Cannon. And actually, they ended up getting imprisoned by the FDR administration for their activities. And then the third one was in Toledo, the American Workers' Party, headed by A.J. Musty and his American Workers' Party. And he later became a pacifist and a very big name in the anti-war movement against the Vietnam War in the 60s and 70s. So the most glaring similarity of all is that for each of these militant strikes, the cops and the National Guard were called out. They were mobilized to repress the strikers. And in each case, strikers were killed by the police and by the National Guard. Here in California, it was the police that shot 2 of the strikers. In fact, we have a mural in front of our union hall on the sidewalk that says police murder, 2 ILA longshoremen shot in the back, police murder. So all of these things worked together to show the power of the working class. And so what I would like to do is just examine where Local 10 solidarity actions have looked through the lens of these important militant strikes back in 34 and try to carry through those class struggle principles. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, except to say, if you're really interested in those analysis, a good historical political analysis of those 3 strikes, check Art Price's book, that's Preis, Labor's Giant Step. So, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I guess a video is worth 10,000 words.
To hell with the laws, to hell with the injunctions. I believe that that's what's necessary.
This is more than just another demonstration. This is a challenge to our system of free enterprise. Here you have millions of dollars worth of goods on a ship back there, and people here saying that if you do business with South Africa, you can't do it here.
This money is made off the most extreme exploitation of the black people in South Africa. Families are divided, people are being pushed out. It's like if you were in California and people were pushed out on the Mojave Desert and put in tin shacks with no way to grow food and no way to live, and they die. Every minute in South Africa, a child under 5 on the average dies of starvation.
I've been aboard this ship 3 times, and I'll work any other. Matter of fact, I was in the gang that discharged the Australian cargo. We have no quarrel with the people of Australia. We have no quarrel with Ned Lloyd Lines. We have a quarrel with the South African government.
It's got the blood of the courageous youth in Soweto that stood up against the vicious, racist apartheid regime.
Of this administration of this city for passing paper resolutions against apartheid and then using the police force to remove people and workers who are trying to strike an economic blow against that regime.
It was a longshore courage in deliberately violating the Taft-Hartley law and the union contract that made that successful.
By the way, I want to thank Nadia Williams and Brian. I met both. Well, I knew Brian before, but it's from the Fort Point gang. They have meetings regularly and just kind of getting together. And I think you trace your roots back to the 34 strike. Is that correct, Brian? Nadia?
I don't.
No, I know.
I wasn't actually, you're not born knowing any of this stuff. You have to learn it. And the ILWU is a great place. The hiring hall where we queued up every day for jobs was a great place to learn anything you wanted to know about politics in the world. Wonderful experience.
Okay. I want to point out who these people were. So the first speaker was Larry Wright. He's been a longtime comrade of mine, involved in many of the labor solidarity actions that are going to be discussed later. Larry was a member of the Liberation Support Committee, which aided the national liberation struggles in Southern Africa, Mozambique, Angola, Southwest Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, his father was an official of the Mine, Mill, and Smelters Union, and they were harassed wherever they went by the FBI. And I think most of you have probably heard of the movie Salt of the Earth. It's one of the great labor movies made by, I forget the guy's name, but he was one of the Hollywood 10. And Larry was actually a small blonde-haired kid. He was a small blonde-haired kid in that movie. And then Leo Robinson, I should say, let me preface my remarks. This action didn't just fall from the sky. It was organized well ahead of time. And Leo Robinson actually introduced a resolution back in 1976 to boycott a ship from South Africa. However, that resolution just sat on the shelf and was never implemented. It was 76 was the time of the Soweto uprising that I was referring to. And so it just sat on and nothing happened with it. And so Stan Gao raised a motion at the executive board to implement it. This was in 76. And the executive board just passed the buck. They said, let's let the membership decide. And the framing of the referendum was such that you'd not want to vote for it. It said, if you want to lose Ned Lloyd Line ships coming in support, if you want to lose your PGP, if you want to lose this and that, then vote for this resolution. Guess what? It failed. So then in 1984, Bob Mandel, who used to be in the militant caucus and led a really important strike in KNC Glass Company. It was a warehouse. Bob was in Local 6. It was a warehouse strike by undocumented immigrant workers. And Bob went around to all the houses in the area with the help of Stan Gao and Howard Kaler to rally them to support the undocumented workers in their struggle. And they battled police. And so Bob and Howard had this relationship for some time. And Bob, in 1984, said to Howard, now's the time to strike while the iron is hot, because gold miners were being shot down, killed, arrested for striking. The apartheid regime wasn't letting them have unions even. And so Howard put the resolution forward on October 18th, 1943. October 18th, 1984. I was asleep because actually it's easy for me to remember that because it's my birthday. But no, the strike was not 1943. It was 84. So that's how it happened. And it takes organizing. And the important thing, I think a lot of you may not know this, but it went to arbitration. And the international president, Jim Herman, sided with the employers that this was an illegal action in violation of the PMA contract, and it has to stop. Well, we have autonomy in the locals, and Local 10 just refused to obey what the PMA was saying, what the arbitrator was saying, and what our own union officials were saying. So that action lasted for 10 days. On the 11th day, an injunction came down and the action was broken. So the next important struggle that we were involved in, and Brian was president in 1996. I was going over to England to a conference of the International Transport Workers Federation, 20 million strong transport workers union. It's based in London. And Steve Zeltzer said to me, hey, you're going over to England. You know, there's an important strike in Liverpool. You ought to go check it out. So I asked Brian, I said, hey, Brian, I hear there's an important strike going on in Liverpool. What do you think about me going over there? He says, sure. And give them solidarity greetings from the ILWU. You don't know how much that meant to these workers. They were isolated. Their own union bureaucracy, the general secretary, was Bill Morris. He was abiding by Thatcher's anti-union laws, which said you have to give the employer 30 days notice if you're going to put up a picket line. You know, any of the old timers know that's bullshit. If there's a picket line, you don't cross it, period. And so I think we'll play this clip so you can see exactly what happened in Liverpool.
They come out with a flimsy excuse by saying it's the fabric of the union, the law. We know, we've been outside the law for 12 months. The law says we must cross the picket line. We didn't cross the picket line.
What I'm saying to you is, don't insult the intelligence of the working class.
It will be every docker in every port around the world, so that Mercy Dock and Harbor Company must understand that their cargo may be loaded here by scabs, but it will not be unloaded in any port in the world. Won't take no more. Won't take no more.
Are we ready to fight?
Damn right. Are we ready to fight? Damn right.
When a ship came in from Thamesport, which was a port that was administered by Mercy Docks and Harbor, when it came into the port of Oakland, labor activists in this port put up a picket line, and longshoremen dispatched to the job saw the signs that called for longshoremen not to work the ship in solidarity with the Liverpool dock workers.
The arbitrator have ruled that it was a bona fide health and safety. We can't cross because of the health and safety reasons. Okay?
1, 2, 3, 4. Don't go through that terminal door. 5, 6, 7, 8. Not until they reinstate.
There is an interesting book written by one of the late stewards of the Dock Workers Union, Mike Carden. It's called Liverpool Dock Workers, A History of Rebellion and Betrayal. And this is the point I'm trying to get across. Every one of these militant actions first had to fight their own union bureaucracy so they could do the action, and then take on the employers and the state. Now, if you don't want to read the whole book, because it is a tome of 750 pages or so. So Brian Palmer has written a review of Mike Carden's book in Counterpunch. So if you just put in Brian Palmer's name at the Counterpunch website, you can read his review. So the important thing here is that Bill Morris, the General Secretary of the Transport and General Workers Union that represented the dock workers, Bill Morris was rewarded for his betrayal and given a seat in the House of Lords, and he still sits there today. So, again, it was a revolt against the union leadership so that they could conduct this struggle, which became an international struggle. And you'll see later on the connections in Liverpool at their conferences linked militant dock workers unions around the world.
That the global economy will not run without the consent of the workers. And we don't just mean longshore workers, but workers everywhere in this country and around the world. When the ILWU boycotted cargo from El Salvador and apartheid South Africa, when we would not work scab grapes from the California Valley or cross picket lines in support of the fired Liverpool dockers, these were concrete expressions of our understanding that the interests of working people transcend national and local boundaries. But what they have in mind for us is a race to the bottom, dismantling our protective laws wherever they find us weak. But they want to pit workers from one country against the workers of another, to erase all of our protections and standards in an international corporate feeding frenzy in which workers are not just on the menu, we're the main course. We will not cooperate.
As a gesture of solidarity, dock workers closed down freight shipments at ports up and down the West Coast. The normally bustling and noisy port of Oakland fell silent at 10 this morning as members of 2 longshore workers locals walked off the job. The people who operate the equipment and the clerks who keep track of the movement of containers took off after their 10 o'clock break. Meantime, in San Francisco, other members of the Longshore Workers Union took their message to the Embarcadero and the public. It was a protest aimed at the World Trade Organization. In a press release, International Union President Brian McWilliams explained it this way: by taking time out from work to voice our concerns, the ILWU is telling the transnational corporations that they cannot run the global economy without the workers of the world. Some 9,600 union members in 3 dozen West Coast ports were expected to take part in today's actions.
I want to move from the Liverpool dockers to the Charleston longshore struggle because they're directly related.
Policemen them shooting these rubber bullets.
Oh, they were shooting rubber bullets?
Oh yeah, they hit a lot of guys with rubber bullets.
Rubber bullets, bean bags.
Bean bags.
And you asked did anybody get bitten? No, but they definitely got beaten.
So they beat up a lot of people.
They beat some people.
Yeah,
and,
I was one of the ones that beat real bad.
We felt that they did it without cause, we were provoked and by them putting sticks on you.
Oh, and then they had a helicopter with it?
Yes, they did.
They had helicopters.
We felt that this was something that we simply could not stand by and watch happen in South Carolina, because over the last 40 years, the workers in South Carolina, the longshore workers, had worked very hard and very diligently to build the standards that we enjoy, because in South Carolina, the opportunities for the blue-collar workers are not that great.
Yeah, free the Charleston Fire! Yeah, free the Charleston Fire! Yeah, free the Charleston Fire! Yeah.
Open the door for them and let them out. Thank you so much.
I'm going to Charleston and miss my miss.
20 years we're working this with the same container vessel, and they just come in, they decided they feel as though they're going to take it away from us, one non-union company, and we had to retaliate. I feel as though if I have to do what I'd done before, I'll do it again.
Here's the connection between the Charleston longshore struggle and Liverpool. I was sitting down at breakfast, reading the New York Times, and saw this picture from Charleston, South Carolina, of black and white longshore workers fighting together, defending their picket line against a police attack. And this wasn't an ordinary attack. They had helicopters, tanks, personnel carriers. It was incredible what they were up against. And I thought this was an important struggle because, you know, really the main obstacle to having a socialist revolution in this country is the race question, that blacks and whites can't get together. The employers play the race game. Some union officials exclude blacks from the union. In fact, in Charleston, in the checkers union, that's the clerks, they didn't have any blacks. But coming out of that struggle, which was victorious, they integrated the clerks union. So that was an important step forward. And so the Charleston the way they won this struggle was in Liverpool at one of their international conferences. I met the head of La Coordinadora, Julian Garcia. And I said, there's an important strike in Charleston. And if you want the ILWU to join this new militant International Dock Workers Council, then you have to show the ILWU how the IDC is different than the ITF, how it's more militant and takes action. And so he immediately went up the gangway of the ship, the Nordana ship. He talked to the captain and he said, "We're not unloading this ship because it's been stowed by scabs, unprofessional. Until you get a union contract, we're not going to unload this ship." and within 48 hours, they had a contract. So that's how international solidarity works. I mean, it's real. And you make your contacts, your links at conferences or different struggles. And that's what happened with the Charleston struggle. Now, the downside of it is Ken Riley, who was prominently featured, he was the president, ended up, so the president of the ILA in New York was Irish. John Bowers refused to aid, to support the Liverpool, the Charleston dock workers. He refused to support their struggle. Yet he was more than willing to help out the Liverpool dock workers. And I figured it out after a while. John Bowers is Irish, the Liverpool dockers are Irish. So he would hypocritically support workers in England, but he won't support his own workers who were Black, predominantly Black in Charleston. And so you saw a clip there of thousands of workers marching in Charleston. And so what Local 10 did is bring this fight of Charleston to the Longshore Caucus and then to the ILWU convention. And we passed it on to the AFL-CIO, and it became a cause célèbre of the trade union movement. And that's what you saw with all those banners and workers marching in Charleston. What you didn't see were the state troopers, the sharpshooters on every building there protecting the Confederate flag. They were afraid we're going to tear it down, and they would have shot anybody that attempted to do that. So it was pretty dramatic. So let's see, where are we going now? That was the Charleston 5 struggle, which was won through international labor solidarity. ILWU ended up joining the International Dock Workers Council. Can you show everyone the attack by the police in the port of Oakland, anti-war protesters?
Workers can stop it. War is for profit. Workers can stop it. War is for profit. Workers on fire. What is it?
I got hit by a fucking tear gas.
Oh, man.
Tell them all to get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here.
How you doing?
They just arrested me. Okay. All right? Let them know that...
What did they arrest you for?
I don't know. They haven't told me.
Officer, can you say what you...
Here's the evidence. That's the evidence. Where the guys got shot back here, the two longshore.
Did you arrest him for having this on the job?
No.
What was he arrested for?
I don't even know. He doesn't. Nobody knows. They just do whatever they want.
In 2003, there were massive demonstrations against the Iraq War. 1 million or more in Hyde Park. Same in Paris and Rome. Massive demonstrations, but not workers' strikes. And I was invited to be one of the speakers at Hyde Park by Bob Crow, the General Secretary of the Rail, Maritime, and Transport Union. That's the largest audience I ever addressed. But I came back after that rally to Oakland. Actually, just a little funny aside. My wife and I are waiting in line to get on the plane to board, and there's an announcement. Will Jack Heyman please come to airport security? My wife just about had a heart attack. She thought she was never going to see me again. And they pulled me aside and said, there's something suspicious showing in your luggage. If you come down and open your luggage, we won't break the lock. I said, sure, I'll go down to the tarmac and open it. I got down to the tarmac and they had already broken the luggage. So anyway, so much for that. But it was, what it was 8 crystal goblets given to me by the Fire Brigade Union. The Fire Brigade Union in Britain is one of the most militant unions, unlike in this country. This is in response, retribution for the 2003 attack by the OPD. I just want to say one thing. This was the war on terror. And Jerry Brown put together a California Anti-Terrorism and Information Center, and they oversaw all the port security. And the head of that agency said, how did he put it? This is a war against terror. If you protest against this war against terror, then you can be considered a terrorist. He actually said that. So, so now 2008, 5 years later, we got our revenge. This was retribution for the police attack.
Workers' rights, to oppose the war, bring home the troops, stand up for what you believe in. That's what we got going on, and I can't say it no better than that.
We all know about the struggle in the 1800s for the 8-hour day, which was a very important struggle. It was a struggle for safety, it was a struggle for survival, and it was a struggle for working conditions here in the United States. Here in the United States, workers have been struggling a long time, and it seems like now, brothers and sisters, we're struggling harder than ever.
I asked the New York Times reporter last week, will you be covering this event? And he said, is it newsworthy? What do you say? Is it newsworthy?
Stop the war now! Stop the war now! Union time! Union time! Union time!
But they were playing the Internationale. This was a historic march down the Embarcadero where the 34 strike took place. There were 2 ports on the West Coast that had demonstrations, San Francisco and Seattle. Bob McElrath, the president of the union, was from the Seattle Northwest. He was from the Northwest. And that demonstration was in contrast to the one on the Embarcadero. Theirs was a sea of American flags, social patriotism. Ours was signs celebrating May Day, calling for an end to the war, and international solidarity to bring it about. So, well, I'm going to try to wrap this up. So we have one more video, but Brian has succinctly said that this war, genocidal war in Gaza, is the moral crisis of our time. And I agree with him. And it's not only Gaza, now it's West Bank, and tomorrow it could be spread to Lebanon. And if we don't stop the Zionists, they're going to bring about a third world war. And I don't think that's an exaggeration, because they keep on sending bombs to Netanyahu or whoever will be the minister of war. So anyway, in 2002, the IDF, actually it's the Israeli offensive or occupy forces and not defensive forces, bombed the Palestinian general Federation of Trade Unions, headquarters in the West Bank. And I was business agent at the time. And we, officers of Local 10, sent a very sharp letter to the Israeli consulate protesting their bombing of our brothers and sisters in the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions. They were incensed, and they demanded a meeting with our executive board. And I think, Steve, you were there.
Without a political force.
You filmed that. And we ended up rejecting their demand that they meet with us and threw them out of the building. So that was in 2002. That was in response to our open letter to the Israeli consulate. So in 2010, there was, similar to today, there was a Gaza Freedom Flotilla that was bringing medical aid and food by ship. There's several ships in a caravan, and the Israeli military landed their armed troops on the boats, and the humanitarian aid workers were unarmed, and it was very bloody. They ended up killing 10 of the aid workers, and that did it for us and the Palestinian community. And so that inspired or sparked off mass demonstrations against the next Zim ship that came in. So that was in 2010. And we just continued that, supporting the picketers, Palestinian picketers and people who were opposed to the Israeli repression of Palestinians in 2014, 2021, and 2023. Zim lines are blocked from coming into the port of Oakland. So we're doing the right thing, but the other ILWU ports are not. And what we attempted to do at the convention was to follow a request, honor a request of the PGFTU and the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa. Both asked our convention to refuse to handle military cargo to Israel.
Come on, guys! Hey! Stop the truck! Stop the Picket line me! Stop the truck! Stop the truck! We have people in
If longshoremen decide they're not going to cross the picket line, then the Zim ship that's coming in is not going to be worked. And that's going to be repeated around the world in Norway, Sweden, South Africa.
One-day protest is not enough. I mean, we have to have a continued fight, a direction to go in, you know, like some type of workers' party with a connection to fight up here. Labor unions only can do so much without a political force.
Today, what you witnessed was the current young membership of ILWU Local 10 answering the call. We claim no easy victories and tell no lies. That's right. Solidarity to the Palestinians. Solidarity to the working class around the world. Solidarity to the
Okay, I'm just going to jump forward and say that the ILWU convention this year was held in Vancouver, Canada. The Canadian ILWU came out with a statement in solidarity with the PGFTU. The ILWU international leadership in San Francisco said nothing. They have said nothing on the war. And the resolution that was passed was milquetoast. It was not a resolution for action. It was a resolution just for more words and inaction. So that's where we're at now in the ILWU. And it's going to be an uphill fight because this bureaucracy now is moving more and more to the right. let's see. Yeah. So I just wanted to conclude. Anthony, if he spoke, was going to make the point that, and I agree with him, we need a workers' party in this country. Whether it's Biden or Kamala Harris for the Democrats, they're going to do the same thing. They're just going to back whatever the Zionist government wants. And the majority of Americans don't support either of the candidates. So we need to have our own party. It's something that has happened in other countries before, but we need a workers' party that's going to fight for jobs in warehouse and longshore. And the way to fight for it in longshore is to call for workers' control of technology. Because if we don't have that control, you're going to have just a couple longshore workers in every terminal. And the only way that is going to come about, and maybe it's not tomorrow, but it's what we do need down the road, is a class struggle workers' party to build a workers' government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jack. So let's open it up and people raise their hand. Bob?
Look, first of all, thanks for allowing me to speak. My history is one that I've been an elected representative of the Seamen's Union of Australia and also the Maritime Union. And it's great to see Brian McWilliams here. I remember on April the 7th, 1998, when the major stevedore in Australia sacked its entire stevedoring workforce, that I rang Brian, and that same day him and some of his officers went and got arrested at the Australian consulate in San Francisco, and from then on flowed the international solidarity that perhaps saved the Maritime Union of Australia. That was the solidarity in capturing the Columbus, Canada, in Los Angeles, and for 17 days and nights, the ILWU refused to cross the picket line, refused to touch any scab cargo, and in the end, that was the crucial lever that, even though we won some major high court cases, the crucial lever was the international solidarity by the ILWU, and that's a debt that the no wharfie or maritime worker in Australia can ever repay the ILWU for that act of solidarity. But that was 25 years ago, 26 years ago, and a lot has changed in the world since then. And what I've seen has been this very rightward drift of once formerly proud left unions, particularly in very important spheres of national and world economies. And sadly, that's been the case in the Maritime Union. It's definitely the case in from an outsider looking in with the ILWU, sadly. It's happened in Britain. We've seen over just the last few years, the International Dock Workers Council that's been captured by very conservative forces, mainly from the East Coast Longshoremen's Union, that has captured the leadership of the IDC, which is in a very quick period of time turned it into a bureaucratic outfit from its very much syndicalist roots, and that is something that is going to have a profound effect on international solidarity the world over. The historic nature that Jack and Steve and Brian talked about with the ILWU can be mirrored in many ways with the Maritime Union of Australia. in 1938, our wharfies in Port Kembla went on a 9-week strike against pig iron being loaded to Japan. But those days, and we were leaders in the struggle in the Vietnam War, in the struggle against apartheid. But for whatever reasons that I think are deeply rooted in some very unique changes that have happened in the World Trade Union movement over the last 30 years or so, with globalization, deunionization, that unions have become, instead of more outward looking, they've become more inward looking. They've become in what is, I think, a huge dichotomy. Union bureaucracies have become much wealthier, but their membership much poorer, both in a sense of in membership coverage, but also in the political outlook of the membership, and that has had a really, I think, profound effect. And the whole maybe the genesis, or maybe the what we see now in this almost inexplicable lack of international response by dock workers the world over to what is happening in Gaza is a culmination of that of the last 30 years of slowly creeping stupefaction and obedience to our capitalist masters by a leadership that is increasingly, and Jack touched upon it, has seen more in alliances with the employing class than with the radicalisation of the rank and file. And I think that's a big problem. We have to really work hard in trying to combat as a group, and that's why I think this is such a wonderful opportunity that's been made. And Steve and Jack and other comrades who were responsible for this, I think it's a really wonderful thing.
Okay.
But that's about all I've got to say, except that this horror that is being played out before our eyes in Gaza, without, where we're seeing organisations talk left. I know there's an old saying, talk's cheap, and that's exactly what we're seeing out of many dock workers unions at the present time. They're talking about doing things, but they're not doing anything, because to do anything means that they're going to come in the conflict with the major players of the capitalist system, and so they're keeping their head down when it is a time to stand up on your feet.
This question mostly is to Jack. We are now living in a period of world economic crisis, and we've seen the ultra-right and reactionary forces growing around the world. People have been mentioning, the strikes in 1934, right here in the Bay Area, and around that time, that was a period of a lot of labor and radical surges in the United States and elsewhere. Also came down a lot of repression. The Smith Act of 1940 was signed into law by President Franklin Roosevelt, and was used against members of the Socialist Workers' Party, then against members of the Communist Party, the early 50s. Now we're seeing that we got a prosecutor that is going to get the nomination of the Democratic Party. and with a record of asking the Supreme Court of the United States to uphold the death penalty laws in California and all reactionary stuff, and also a lunatic Trump running for the Republican Party. And then I'm alarmed by the turn that the labor movement is taking. I mean, the president of the Teamsters went to the Republican convention and supported Donald Trump. So how do you see the future for the next couple of years? Do you think we should start trying to do a lot of United Front demonstrations, stronger fights against the labor bureaucracy? I would like to know your insights.
So your question is, what shall we do with this rightward trend around the globe? How do we fight it?
Essentially, yeah. But I also threw down the question of the trade union bureaucracy being close more to the government than the Teamsters president going into the Republican convention and supporting Trump, and all these right-wing turns that are happening.
Well, what I see is more and more repression of the working class and of minorities, and I stated this in my conclusion that more than ever now, we need a party of the working class, a workers' party. This is the insanity of politics today. For example, in 2003, when you saw that horror act by the OPD, the Oakland Police Department, attacking unarmed anti-war demonstrators, and they just shot up people, and many were sent to the hospital and to prison. And I think that what we have to do is organize along those lines to defend people's right to protest. Number one, that's the big thing right now, because the government, whether it's Democrat or Republican, are coming down on freedom of expression, because if you criticize the Israeli government, then you're an anti-Semite, and it's affecting universities, even administrators of universities. It's simply outrageous. That's number one, the fight for freedom of the press, freedom of speech. So, this was actually one of the main demands of the Wobblies at the turn of the last century, freedom of speech. And I think we have to start there, have United Front demonstrations. Brian and I and James Curtis, a longshoreman from Local 10, went down to show solidarity at Santa Cruz because they're protesting there against this genocidal war and getting beaten up by the police. And so the unions have to come out and be on their little shells in their union and their day-to-day routine and defend these people. Because what's left in 2003, after the police shot up people, arrested people, that was Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown ordered the police attack, and the ILWU turned around a couple months later and endorsed Jerry Brown because he's a Democrat. This is insanity. It really is. I mean, we really, the ILWU at one point, Brian, you were there. We tried to get the Labor Party going in Cleveland. I think maybe it looks far-fetched at this point, but I think it's the only solution to try to build a workers' party, defending free speech, defending striking workers, defending women's right to abortion, you name it. But it's not just Trump and the Republicans that are the repressive party. And we need to appeal to the working class to come together and defend these issues.
I mean, one of the issues, there's a fight at the Alcatraz Cruises, Hornblower, and it's a non-union operation with the federal contract. And they've been fighting union busting and no action by the ILWU. In fact, there was a picket earlier this month. We attended, you spoke at it, Jack, but there were very few longshoremen there. There's no solidarity even in the port of San Francisco against the scab, a non-union operation. So I think that, you know, that it's right here at home. You don't have to go just on the issue of the right to a union contract and taking action to shut down the port to make sure that they're unionized and they get a contract. Isis, you have your hand up?
Yep. My hand's up.
Mark, you were next.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't mind having my video on if nobody else minds.
You can put it on.
My name's Mark Lance. I'm a teacher in New York City. I'm a former member of the National Maritime Union, and in fact was in the NMU with Jack in New York back in the day. I'm also a supporter of the Internationalist Group. I'm glad it's come up both by Ricardo and Jack mentioned it too, but because I think it's really the elephant in the room, namely the Democratic Party. That every time there's a possibility of real class struggle, here comes the Democratic Party, the Friends of Labor, to put the brakes on it. Jack mentioned Jerry Brown in Oakland. I was thinking that when the ILWU was working without a contract and everybody was worried about the supply chains, here comes Biden out to a battleship in Port of Los Angeles to tell the ILWU to stay on the job. And I believe the ILWU officials were on that battleship too. Then shortly after that, when the railroad workers had the possibility of going on a legal strike and the ILWU was still without a contract, and there was a possibility of the Teamsters going on strike, which would have really knocked the country on its ear. Here comes the Democratic Party to illegalize that strike with not only the support of the Democratic Party, but even the so-called socialists of the squad, AOC and so forth, also voting to illegalize that strike. Tens of thousands of people now are protesting against the genocide in Gaza. And my fear is that many of those who a couple of weeks ago were chanting Genocide Joe are now going to say that the main end, and the task now is to fight the real enemy, Trump, and are going to end up voting for the vice president of that same administration who's been supplying weapons to Israel. So the Internationalist Group calls on labor to break with the Democrats and build a class struggle workers' party. And I just want to stress, it's not a side point or a sectarian point. The Democratic Party is not a lesser evil. It's not a friend of labor. They are the class enemy. And until that's inscribed on the banner of labor, we're doomed to defeat.
Okay, Isis?
I wanted to say something about when Jack just said, you know, labor needs to not be insulated. By way of a correction about some of the visuals that we saw about 1984, some of the footage in the video was actually not from 1984, but from 1986, when the Campaign Against Apartheid, a group that was based on campus at UC Berkeley, put up a picket line. And a lot of you know that I'm who I am. I'm one of Howard Kaler's daughters. And in 1984, when the injunction came down on Local 10 to stop the action that they took, which did not require any kind of picket line because the longshoremen acted themselves. When the injunction came down, however, and the leadership said, everybody go back to work, my dad went out and said, no, this is a bad idea. We're not working South African cargo. Anybody who wants to put up a picket line, I'm going to be on it. And they put up a picket line on the 11th day, which was very quickly dismantled, and that action was over. But my entire family basically joined the Campaign Against Apartheid at UC Berkeley, and we worked together with students and community members to put up a picket line in 1986, about a year and a half after the 1984 action, and we shut down another ship carrying South African cargo for a couple of days. And not only did this continue the struggle of the ILWU from 1984, but it also educated the young people, the students at UC, about labor solidarity. And I still work with a whole lot of these people who were all young people back in the 1980s. And they are still, in all the work that they're doing, even if they're not working with labor, even if they don't have a union, they're all looking to that bridge between labor and students and other community groups, which I think is really important. And it's really important that these people learned that lesson by working together with people from the ILWU.
Okay, Bob, you have your hand up.
A couple of things. I think that hands down the most important development in the U.S. labor movement, other than the degeneration of the ILWU, is the UCUAW Palestine strike. And interestingly, having met with the Santa Cruz chief steward and the local president, they actually are aware of and took inspiration from the 1984 anti-apartheid action. So keeping knowledge of these things alive is truly important. I mean, the scale of the UC strike was huge. It didn't encompass all 48,000 members, but before it was enjoined and before the international ordered them to capitulate, shortly after Sean Fain endorsed Biden, the strike involved probably 25,000 UC employees, and that is the largest political strike in decades. And this thing went on 3, 4, 5 weeks. So it's hugely important, and we should, as grim as times are, and as much as the tide is swinging towards Kamala Harris and the Democrats, these are things we need to continue not only to hold on to but teach about. And I'd like to just make a couple of points about the ILWU history. Jack touched on the very important fact that at one point warehouse was very large, and warehouse was large because the longshoremen refused to move any scab cargo that was brought out of warehouses onto the docks. And a key part of the victory of the KNC strike, which was 1975, early 75, is that Local 34 clerks identified containers of glass coming from Poland to be sent to the scab KNC factory to be worked on, and they disappeared the glass for the duration of the strike. That was as critical to the victory as the mass picketing. And that solidarity with 34 originated in the chili boycott of late 1974, which started with a picket by community activists, mostly organized by the Spartacus League in LA, and in our port was actually organized from within the union by Stanton and Howard and the two brothers from 34. And a couple of other things. ILWU had played, and hopefully Local 10 will continue to do this despite the degeneration of the international. the qualitative shift to the right. It's played a very positive role in terms of alliance with the teachers union. I think in 2007, Jack and I organized the teachers came down. I was in the teachers union at that point, and we picketed at SSA, which was the key player in the Iraq War, demanding port money for schools, not for weapons. ILWU honored the picket line, and I believe 2 years ago there was a one-day joint action where the teachers walked out against privatization of the schools, and then with foreknowledge from the union came down and picketed the docks against privatization of the port, which is being, pushed by the Oakland A's, then Oakland A's. So these are still living, and one must not forget Juneteenth and that huge show of support against police brutality, which the ILWU undertook. So that's it, but I agree completely that right now, standing against the flow towards Harris as God's Savior is critical. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Well, one of the issues, I think, is the rise of fascism internationally. There's a fascist movement. And while I don't support Biden or the Democrats, we need a Labor Party. The fact of the matter is there's a section of the capitalists who want a fascist government in the United States. And they've got a Supreme Court that said a president, if he commits acts, if they're official, if he declares them official, he can do anything he wants, basically. So there needs to be a united front against fascism. And this is critical. It's going to grow. It's not going to go away no matter who's elected. And also the Republicans have said that they're going to stay in power regardless. They're going to take power regardless of the results of the election. So there's a danger of another fascist coup, insurrection, and there's no education, there's no organization, there's no debate in the labor movement, which I think is critical. Tom?
I'm speaking for the Bolshevik tendency. I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in the Local 10 1984 anti-apartheid action, which, as everyone knows, is the first political strike that had taken place in the United States for decades, which is what has made it resonate so strongly and for so long. And it is important, as Jack alluded to, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because there was a small meeting in Howard Keeler's kitchen. Bob was a participant. ISIS might have been in the background, I don't know. But there was a discussion and a decision was made there. Bob talked Howard into agreeing, as Howard has explained to me, that now is a good time to strike or to attempt to put an anti-apartheid boycott into action in Local 10. The small group was called the External Tendency, by the way, for anyone who's interested. And at a public meeting that was that we organized while the boycott was underway, Howard said something which impressed me a great deal at the time, and I think is still a very important aspect of understanding why the thing went as well as it was. And he said it was that basically the boycott was successful because it was a series of overlapping united fronts within united fronts. Howard and the other people who were leading that action understood the importance of being able to work together and unite a broad range of people for a common objective, despite other differences they might have. So I know that the 1984 boycott had the active participation of Black nationalists, varieties of Trotskyists, Maoists, Communist Party, and even some Democrats. We got some cooperation from Ron Dellon's office that helped, to try to break the PR boycott that we were facing. And people did work together because they all agreed on a common objective, because they all wanted this thing to win. The exception to that, unfortunately, was the Spartacus League, which behaved in that instance in a really absurdly sectarian fashion. And the lowest point of which was that they set up a so-called picket line in front of the action the first night that the longshoremen went on to, and then they denounced the participants as the longshoremen actually carrying out the action as scabs for ignoring the Spartacus League's provocation. That's part of a different story, of course. 10 years ago, in December 2014, Jack and Howard spoke at a meeting that we organized in the Bay Area to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the action. And one of the key points of that I remember Jack making was how critical the success of 1984 boycott, which hadn't been attempted before, how critical that was to the success of the subsequent actions that he had played a central role in. The most famous of which was the May Day 2008 shutting down the West Coast against the imperialist war in Iraq. That was really a huge achievement. Unfortunately, not part of a larger wave of class struggle that actually impacted imperialist policy, but it was a significant achievement, and it demonstrated what can be done. I think one of the things that's very important in all of this, and Jack again alluded to this, the three general strikes that launched the CIO in 1934, each one was organized by left Marxist cadre organizations that did in their own way, as best they understood, push the class struggle forward. I think that revolutionary organization is key, even in this moment of where we are at a very low ebb. Everything remains possible. And the history of 1984 and the other events, which Neptune Jade, et cetera, which have been discussed today, is a living one. And it has a lot of vital political lessons for militants who are engaged in class struggle today and for those who are going to come in the future. And I'd very much like to thank Steve and whoever else was involved in organizing a meeting tonight, because I think it's very useful.
Are there any other comments and discussions? I mean, I think I'm actually optimistic, because the confrontation that's coming, and there is a mass confrontation coming between the capitalists and the working class, is going to lead to a fight back. And the political problem is workers are not prepared for this war, this confrontation, and that's a danger. Becca?
Yeah. I just wanted to come in. I'm Becca. I'm from Portland, Oregon. I was involved in a lot of the solidarity work during the lockouts that happened on the Columbia River about a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago here. I am a member of IATSE, the Stagehands Union, Local 28, member of the Class Struggle Workers Portland, and a supporter of the Internationalist Group. I just wanted to come in on a couple of things because I think this conversation has been actually really interesting. The history. I think for folks like me who were not around then, it's really important to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and to take these lessons. I think it's really important for us to, like somebody said earlier, keep the class memory alive, right? Like to make sure that we actually take these experiences forward into our future work. So thanks for the discussion and the presentations. That was excellent. But I just wanted to come in on a couple of things. One is that there are some unions here in Portland who have passed resolutions calling for workers' actions, including hot cargo, to stop the shipment and distribution of war goods to Israel. And we have some of those published in leaflet form. There are like now 4 area locals that have published resolutions calling for this, which is excellent. But unfortunately, they're mostly like construction trades. There's also a school workers union, and they don't actually directly handle war goods very often. And so we were really disappointed when the Local 10 resolution did not pass at the ILWU International Convention, because we were kind of hoping that the longshore workers who actually do that work could sort of lead the charge for us, so that we could sort of put some of our words into action in that way. We are still spreading the resolution, of course. We're talking to a few other union locals about it, including another one of the ILWU locals in town. It's a warehouse local. They don't really represent warehouse workers. They represent daycare workers and bookstore workers. It's Local 5, the Powell's Books workers, but they also represent some daycare workers in town. But we've been in conversations with those folks. So we are hoping to spread it, obviously. But we're also kind of stuck in a way in terms of putting those words into action, because we're not in a place yet where we have a pinch point that we can hit. So that's one thing that I wanted to bring up. The other thing that I wanted to say is that, like, I've heard a lot of talk about folks that are calling for a workers' party and like recognizing the bankruptcy of both of the political options that we have in the US. I mean, even like the quote unquote like good Democrats that people used to like Obama, like that was the last president that I was familiar with that actually mobilized the military against a union. And it was here in Portland. They had the Coast Guard came and attacked the pickets on the Columbia River. So, and the boat pickets as well. So they brought out their big water cannons and capsized a bunch of people's boats. But so, I mean, that doesn't seem like a viable alternative if you're a worker, because you don't really have any representation there. But so I think we do need a workers' party. Class Struggle Workers Portland just approved a resolution calling for just that and calling for the unions to break with both of the political parties of capital. And we're working on getting it through our various locals here in town. But I wanted to share it with you. So if it's okay, I'm going to drop the language into the chat so that people can see it. And you can feel free. It's an image file, so you can feel free to save it if you want. And if you want a nicer copy, I'm also happy to email anyone. If you contact me, I can send it to you as well. But I just wanted to bring that up because it's something that I think there's like a crying need for in the US is an actual clean break with the parties of capital who routinely attack workers' organizations, whether it's, Trump or Biden. Either way, they're all against us. And they're certainly lockstep behind whatever kind of World War III nightmare they're trying to unleash on us next, because we know that Gaza is not going to be the last step in this war. So I think we need to, folks that recognize that need to start trying to do something about it. So I'll drop it in the chat. Thanks.
One of the things around the issue of repression is the Supreme Court ruling that you can arrest people for being poor or homeless. And August 1st, they're going to be mass arrests in San Francisco and around the state of poor people, homeless people, people that have health problems, and they're going to be put in jail. So I'm supporting a United Front action on August 1st at San Francisco City Hall. There are other groups that are going to be there to protest, arrest the billionaires, not the homeless. And so I think we have to concretize this United Front to actual specific class demands that, in this case, democratic rights against the repression. And then you can, both the Democrats and Republicans together, it was Newsom and London Breed who supported the Supreme Court in calling for the arrest of people who are homeless and mentally ill. So I think that that's something that, is another opportunity to unite around a working class democratic issue, a class issue that can unite people. And I think that you're fighting the Democrats right there directly, because the Democrats are supporting this repression and arrest. So, Bob?
I sort of kicked I mean, I agree with you completely on the importance of the homeless decision, and Newsom played a direct role in getting it certified to be heard by the Supreme Court, and then has jumped all over it. But what I kicked myself about is that I don't think there should be any discussion of the ILWU or the UC Santa Cruz Palestinian strike without mention of Mumia, because one of the great actions of solidarity was the ILWU shut down for Mumia's freedom. And at UC Santa Cruz, part of the connection is the '84 boycott, and Huey having gotten his PhD at Santa Cruz, and Mumia currently being enrolled. And I don't say this rhetorically. This day I spent on the picket line down there, I heard lots of that stuff from various of the folks on picket.
Yeah, I want to welcome Dr. Cleo Silvers on board and Ron Painter from Memphis, Tennessee. Cleo's the only one I know that was in both the Young Lords and the Black Panther Party. So good to have you on board. Bob Carnegie from Australia talked about about this action that took place in Australia in support of the scabs in Australia were loading ships that were going into LA, and they had a phenomenal success. They had a community picket. The longshoremen in LA refused to go to work, and they demanded that the ship go back to Australia, be unloaded, and be loaded again by union longshoremen. Now, that was a tremendous action. But the point, I don't know if Bob's still here, but the point is that they learned from what we did in Local 10 the year before. And that was the Neptune Jade action, where we stopped the ship in Oakland, went up to Vancouver. The ship was stopped up there because of a community picket line. Yokohama said they have no part of it. It ended up going to a non-union port dock in Kaohsiung, Formosa. So Brian McWilliams had the brilliant idea. I mean, the ship couldn't go anywhere. When they took it into the dock, they had to repaint it, rename it, and give it a new registration number so she could unload the cargo. And this was a complete victory for the ILWU. And the Los Angeles longshoremen followed what we did. And so this says, Brian, do you remember this? ILWU presents Training Your Multinational Corporation. And this is the Neptune Jade, a bulldog on a leash. And it reports on the successful action. The first that I know of, that it was a multinational, international labor action that was completely victorious for the union. So I want to thank Brian for playing an important part of that. But Steve Stallone also, Steve was the editor of the paper, and he covered so much of the Liverpool Dockers and then the Neptune Jade. And we got sued over this. They were going after our union for millions of dollars. And Steve had the brilliant idea to bring all of our telephone logs, our emails, our faxes into his office and claim that we can't give up any of this information because it's a question of freedom of the press. And we won. We beat them back. We never had to pay a penny. And now Willie Adams at the convention just claimed it was a great victory that they had a lawsuit up in Portland. And originally it was $94 million against the union. They ended up settling for $20.5 million. And Willie Adams called that a victory. I mean, they shouldn't have paid a penny. If they read their own union newspaper, they would see how to get out of turning over documents that could be used against you. So anyway, thanks, Steve, and Brian for your contributions there.
I want to thank everyone for participating, for their presentations. And I think we've got some big battles coming ahead. And I think the lessons from the past obviously are critical. And this is the 90th year of the San Francisco General Strike and the Minneapolis Teamsters Strike and the Toledo General Strike. And one of the things when we talk about organizing, in the midst of the Depression, workers organized and they were successful with general strikes and organizing. And I think if you talk about Amazon, that kind of mass action is needed to organize Amazon, surrounding these warehouses of thousands of workers, unemployed and workers, and forcing these companies to unionize. And I think that confrontation is coming if workers are going to be organized. And I think that's why the lessons of this past history are critical for today, because workers were successful and they had militant class struggle leadership that actually made the difference in how these struggles were carried out. And I think that's the importance of learning from this history. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And tomorrow night,
Steve, I would like to correct one thing about what you just said. It's not about having people in the community to picket by the warehouses. What Bob Mandel said was exactly right. That is, and Peter Olney, the international organizer, the way you organize warehouses is that the longshore side of the union refuses to unload cargo for these warehouses. And that's how it was done in the past. And that's the way it can be done again today. You don't need community pickets.
Well, they
have the power at the point of production.
Okay, there are different forms. There are different histories of strikes. The Toledo strike and the Minneapolis strike, they had mass picketing. It was mass pickets, and they used the unemployed. Unemployed were involved in it. So that's part of the struggle. But as far as organizing, the ILWU has abandoned organizing in warehouse. I mean, they could have organized the truckers. They refused to do that. They could have organized with the Amazon workers. They refused to do that. The ILWU leadership is not in an organizing mode of uniting these workers. That is a real problem. They've left it to the Teamsters, and the Teamsters have not been able to organize port truckers. So that's the reality. In fact, the ILWU pulled out of the AFL-CIO. Instead of making a fight in the AFL-CIO, Bob McBell, Big Bob pulled out. There's no debate, no struggle, to unify the labor movement and also to organize the unorganized through direct action.
I thank everyone for coming and participating. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. Solidarity.
See you on the picket line.
Okay, take care.